A homeless woman received an unusual invitation to the wedding of a former millionaire. Upon arrival, she uncovers a secret from the past. The sun had barely risen when Samantha woke up, startled by the familiar sound of cars passing over the bridge above her. The makeshift shelter she called home, a precarious construction of cardboard and tarpaulin, shook slightly with the vibration of LA's morning traffic. Rubbing her tired eyes, she sat up in her worn sleeping bag, watching the first rays of light penetrate through the gaps in her shelter. The air was impregnated with the city's characteristic smell, a mixture of car exhaust, street food, and the lingering humidity of the nearby Los Angeles River. Samantha took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for another day of survival on the streets of the City of Angels. As she stretched, her eyes caught something unusual. An elegant white envelope was wedged between the wooden boards that made up one of the walls of her shelter. Intrigued, she picked it up, feeling the thick, luxurious paper between her calloused fingers. The contrast between the refined envelope and its worn surroundings was striking. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, Samantha carefully opened the envelope, revealing an ornate card. Her eyes ran over the words written in elegant gold calligraphy. Amanda Fairchild and Jonathan Prescott have the honor of inviting you to celebrate their marriage. The world around Samantha seemed to freeze. Amanda Fairchild, a name she hadn't heard for years, but which still evoked a flood of emotions. Friendship, rivalry, envy, and, now, a sharp pang of shame. How had such an exquisite letter reached her humble home? And why would Amanda invite her after so long? Memories of her youth flooded her mind like an uncontrollable tide. She and Amanda, best friends and fierce rivals since childhood, always competing for the best prizes at school, the best-looking boys, the most ambitious dreams. She remembered the shared study nights, the slumber parties full of laughter and whispered secrets, and the promises of an eternal friendship that seemed so real at the time. But life had other plans. While Amanda rose socially, becoming a prominent figure in Los Angeles' elite circles, Samantha faced a series of setbacks that led her to the streets. Job loss, uninsured health problems, an abusive relationship. Each blow pushed her further down, until the ground beneath her feet disappeared completely. Now, holding the wedding invitation, Samantha wondered how their lives had taken such drastically different turns. The expensive paper in her hands seemed to mark her current situation, a cruel reminder of the chasm that separated her present from her youthful dreams. Unable to sit still, Samantha left her shelter, the invitation still firmly in her hand. She walked aimlessly through the streets of Los Angeles, her body moving automatically as her mind whirled. With every store window she passed, she saw her reflection. Disheveled hair, shabby clothes, tired eyes that carried the weight of countless sleepless nights and days of uncertainty. How could she even consider attending the wedding in this state? The idea of standing in front of Amanda, now probably Mrs. Prescott, a name that exuded wealth and prestige, and all her rich and sophisticated guests seemed like a bad joke of fate. The day passed like a blur, with Samantha wandering around the city, alternating between moments of determination. I'm going to this wedding and show that I'm still standing. In despair, who am I kidding? I don't belong in that world anymore. As the sun began to set, tinting the Los Angeles sky with shades of orange and pink, she found herself back in her shelter under the bridge. Sitting on her sleeping bag, Samantha unfolded the invitation once more, her eyes fixed on the date. The wedding was scheduled for a week from today. 7 days. She only had a week to decide whether to face her past or remain hidden under the bridge, letting Amanda's life go on without her nagging presence. With a deep sigh, she tucked the invitation into her worn-out backpack, the only item of value she owned apart from the clothes on her body. Tomorrow, he decided, I'll start planning. If she was going to face Amanda and all her past, she needed to prepare not just physically, but emotionally. Lying in her sleeping bag that night, Samantha lay awake for hours, replaying moments from her youth. The laughs shared with Amanda, the fierce competitions, the dreams whispered during the summer nights. Where had it all gone wrong? How had their lives diverged so drastically? The sound of the city never really stopped, but that night it seemed especially loud to Samantha. Every honk, Every distant conversation, every siren was a reminder of the world she no longer belonged to. A world to which Amanda belonged, into which she would be momentarily reintroduced if she had the courage to accept the invitation. When she finally fell asleep, exhausted by the emotions of the day, Samantha dreamt. She dreamt of gala dresses, glasses of champagne, and looks of pity. But in the midst of the social nightmare, there was a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this invitation was more than a cruel reminder of her downfall. Perhaps it was an opportunity for redemption, a chance to reconnect not just with Amanda, but with the person she used to be. With this faint hope hovering in her mind, Samantha fell into a deep sleep, the sounds of the city merging with the echoes of a long-forgotten past and the uncertain possibilities of a future that, for the first time in years, didn't seem completely bleak. The days that followed receiving the invitation were an emotional roller coaster for Samantha. Each morning brought with it a new wave of determination, only to be succeeded by afternoons of doubt and nights of paralyzing anxiety. Amanda's invitation, carefully tucked away in her battered backpack, seemed to pulsate with an energy of its own, constantly reminding Samantha of the decision she needed to make. On the third day after receiving the invitation, Samantha woke up with a firm resolution. She needed help. She couldn't face this challenge alone. With hesitant but determined steps, she made her way to the local community center, a place that occasionally offered her hot meals and a shower. It was a simple building, with faded walls and motivational posters, but for Samantha, it represented a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. Upon entering the center, her eyes immediately sought out Maria, a middle-aged social worker who always had a kind smile and words of encouragement. Maria was in her makeshift office, a small room with a desk full of papers and an old computer. When she saw Samantha at the door, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Samantha, it's good to see you. Please come in." Samantha hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the invitation in her pocket. Finally, gathering her courage, she went in and sat down in the chair opposite Maria's table. "Maria," Samantha began, her voice trembling, "I need a miracle." The words came out in a gush, and Samantha found herself telling Maria everything. She talked about the unexpected invitation, about Amanda, about the years of friendship and rivalry, and about the chasm that now separated their lives. As she spoke, Samantha felt tears burning in her eyes, years of repressed emotions finally finding an outlet. Maria listened attentively, her eyes full of compassion. When Samantha finished her account, feeling exhausted but strangely relieved, Maria leaned forward and squeezed her hand firmly. "You're stronger than you think, Samantha. We're going to make this happen." In the hours that followed, Maria became a force of nature, mobilizing resources that Samantha didn't even know existed. She made calls, sent emails, and even went out to talk to some local contacts in person. Samantha watched, stunned, as a plan began to take shape. A local organization that provided clothes for job interviews agreed to lend Samantha a simple but elegant dress. It wasn't a designer dress, but it was pretty and discreet enough not to attract attention for the wrong reasons. A neighborhood beauty salon, upon hearing Samantha's story, offered to do her hair and makeup on the day of the event, free of charge. And to top it off, a volunteer from the community center was willing to give her a lift to the ceremony site. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Samantha felt a mixture of gratitude and shame. Why were these people willing to help her? Did she deserve all this? The unexpected kindness made her feel even more inadequate, as if she were preparing for a great farce. The days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Samantha paid a visit to the salon for an appointment where the hairdresser, an enthusiastic young woman called Jen, discussed ideas for an elegant but not too elaborate hairstyle. At the community center, she practiced walking in borrowed heels, stumbling and laughing nervously as Maria encouraged her. Each small step towards the big day brought with it a mixture of excitement and terror. Samantha found herself imagining the moment she would enter the church, visualizing the looks of surprise and possibly disdain from the guests. How would Amanda react to seeing her? Would there be a warm hug or just a polite, distant nod? The day before the wedding, Samantha was standing in front of a broken mirror in her den, holding her borrowed dress against her body. The contrast between the delicate fabric and her harsh surroundings was shocking. For a moment, she considered giving up, going back to the safety of her anonymity on the streets. It would be easier to pretend that the invitation had never come, that Amanda was just a distant memory of a life that no longer belonged to her. But then his eyes caught something in the fragmented reflection. Behind the fatigue and emotional scars, she saw a glimpse of the girl she used to be. Determined, dreamy, full of potential. That girl who competed fiercely with Amanda, not out of spite, but because she believed in herself and her future. Where had that Samantha ended up? Was she still there, buried under years of disappointment and hardship? With trembling hands, Samantha carefully folded the dress and put it in a plastic bag to protect it. Tomorrow would be the day. She would face her past, face Amanda, and, most importantly, confront herself. That night, lying in her sleeping bag, Samantha mentally went over her plan for the next day. Wake up early, go to the community center for a shower, get dressed, meet Jen at the salon, and then head to the church with the volunteer who had offered the ride. Each step felt like a monumental obstacle, but also a step towards something she couldn't quite name. Redemption? Closure? Or maybe just the chance to reconnect with a part of herself that had long been forgotten. The sound of the city at night, once so disturbing, now seemed to lull Samantha into a strange comfort. The distant honking of horns, the murmur of late-night conversations, even the occasional bark of a street dog. It all blended into an urban symphony that reminded Samantha that, despite everything, she was still part of this world. A world that, tomorrow, she would re-encounter in a way she had never expected. With a deep sigh, Samantha closed her eyes, allowing herself, for the first time in a long time, to dream of possibilities. Tomorrow could be the start of something new, or it could be just another difficult day in a long series of them. But one way or another, it would be a day when she allowed herself to be seen again, not just as a homeless person, not just as a shadow from the streets of Los Angeles, but as Samantha, complex, imperfect, resilient. And with that thought, she finally fell asleep, Amanda's invitation tucked safely under her makeshift pillow, a talisman of hope in a world that had long since lost its luster. The dawn of the wedding day brought with it a mixture of emotions for Samantha. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when she opened her eyes, her heart beating fast with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. For a brief moment, lying in her sleeping bag under the bridge, she thought it was all just an elaborate dream. But the touch of the invitation, still tucked under her makeshift pillow, brought her back to reality. With deliberate movements, Samantha began her morning routine, each gesture carrying a greater meaning than it ever had. She washed her face with water from a bottle she kept for special occasions, combed her hair as best she could with a broken comb, and put on her best clothes, a pair of jeans with no rips and a clean t-shirt she had washed the day before in a public restroom. Gathering her few belongings, including the borrowed dress carefully folded in a plastic bag, Samantha set off towards the community center. The streets of Los Angeles, normally a maze of indifference, seemed different that morning. Every person who passed by, every car that honked its horn, every building that rose against the blue sky seemed loaded with possibilities. On arriving at the community center, Samantha was greeted by Maria, who was waiting for her with an encouraging smile and a warm hug. "Ready for the big day?" asked Maria, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and maternal concern. Samantha just nodded, the words stuck in her throat. Maria guided her into the center's bathroom, where a hot shower awaited her, a luxury Samantha hadn't experienced in a long time. As the hot water cascaded over her body, carrying with it layers of dirt and anxiety, Samantha allowed herself, for the first time, to believe that maybe, just maybe, this day could be a new beginning. After her shower, dressed in clean clothes provided by the center, Samantha was taken to the local beauty salon. Jen, the enthusiastic hairdresser who had offered to help, welcomed her with a beaming smile. "We're going to turn you into a princess," exclaimed Jen, guiding Samantha into the chair. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Jen worked on Samantha's hair, transforming the dull, lifeless strands into soft, shiny waves. A volunteer makeup artist applied subtle layers of makeup, highlighting Samantha's eyes and adding color to her pale cheeks. While the professionals worked, Samantha allowed herself to relax a little, letting herself be carried away by the light conversation and occasional laughter. For a moment, she almost forgot the reason for all this preparation, losing herself in the normality of the moment. Finally, it was time to put on the borrowed outfit. With Maria's help, Samantha slipped into the simple but elegant navy blue dress. When she finally turned to the mirror, the image that greeted her left her breathless. The woman in the reflection was both familiar and strange. The eyes that stared back at her still bore the weight of years of struggle, but there was also a glimmer of hope that had long been absent. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her curves in a way that made her feel beautiful, a word Samantha hadn't associated with herself for years. "You look stunning," Maria whispered, with tears in her eyes. Samantha just nodded, unable to form words. The external transformation was impressive, but it was the internal change that really surprised her. For the first time in a long time, she felt worthy. The journey to the church passed like a blur. The volunteer who had offered the lift, a kind man called Carlos, tried to make light conversation, but Samantha barely registered his words. Her mind was focused on what was to come, what it would be like to see Amanda again, how it would feel to enter a world she had left behind so long ago. When the car finally stopped in front of the imposing church, Samantha felt her heart race. The building was magnificent, with its tall towers and colorful stained glass windows. At the front, a red carpet stretched up to the main doors, through which elegantly dressed guests entered in a constant stream. For a moment, Samantha was paralyzed in her car seat, fear threatening to engulf her. What if this was all a mistake? What if she didn't belong there? What if Amanda saw her and regretted the invitation? It was then that she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. Carlos, the volunteer driver, looked at her with understanding. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the bravest thing you can do is just show up." His words, simple but profound, touched something inside Samantha. With a nod of thanks, she opened the car door and took her first step towards the church. The buzz of conversation and laughter grew louder as Samantha approached the entrance. She could feel curious glances in her direction. After all, she wasn't a familiar face to most of the guests. But, surprisingly, the glances were not judgmental, only of passing curiosity. As Samantha entered the church, she was enveloped by the atmosphere of celebration. White flowers and delicate ribbons decorated the pews, and soft organ music filled the air. She chose a discreet seat at the back, her heart beating so loudly that she was sure everyone around her could hear it. Minutes passed, which seemed like hours to Samantha. And then, finally, the music changed. The church doors opened, and there she was, Amanda. Time seemed to freeze. Amanda, radiant in her wedding dress, walked slowly down the aisle. Her smile lit up the whole room, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her at the altar. Jonathan, Samantha assumed. As she watched her old friend walk towards her future, Samantha felt a wave of conflicting emotions. There was joy at seeing Amanda so happy, envy at the life she had built, nostalgia for the times they had shared, and a twinge of sadness for what might have been. The ceremony itself was a blow for Samantha. She heard the vows exchanged, saw the rings being placed, and felt the tears run down her cheeks as the couple sealed their union with a kiss. When the ceremony ended and the guests began to get up to leave, Samantha remained seated, trying to process everything that had happened. She had succeeded. She was there, a silent witness to one of the most important moments in Amanda's life. That's when it happened. As the newlywed couple walked back down the aisle, Amanda's eyes swept the crowd and, for a brief moment, met Samantha's. The recognition was instant. The recognition was instantaneous. Amanda's eyes widened, and her mouth dropped open in surprise. For a second that seemed like an eternity, the two women stared at each other, years of shared history passing between them in a single glance. And then, before Samantha could react, Amanda and Jonathan had passed, carried by the wave of guests towards the church exit. Samantha stood there, motionless, her heart pounding wildly. She had been seen. Amanda had recognized her. What would that mean? What would happen now? With these questions echoing in her mind, Samantha slowly stood up, preparing herself to face whatever came next. The day was far from over, and she knew that the real challenge was yet to come. The ballroom of the hotel where the wedding reception was being held was a spectacle of luxury and elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a soft light over the tables decorated with elaborate floral arrangements and fine china. The music of a small orchestra filled the air, mingling with the excited buzz of the guests. Samantha stood at the entrance to the hall for a few moments, feeling like an intruder in a world to which she no longer belonged. Her eyes scanned the room, instinctively searching for a familiar face among the sea of elegantly dressed strangers. "Samantha, is that you?" The voice came from behind her, making her turn around quickly. There was Thomas, her old schoolmate. The years had been kind to him. Dressed in a well-cut suit, he displayed the confident air of someone who had found his place in the world. "Thomas," Samantha replied, her voice betraying a mixture of surprise and relief at seeing a familiar face. "How long?" "Years," he agreed, his eyes scanning her curiously. "I didn't expect to see you here. How have you been?" The question, so simple and yet so loaded, made Samantha hesitate. How could she explain the years of struggle, the nights under bridges, the days of hunger? How to condense a lifetime of disappointments into a polite social conversation answer? "It's been a journey," she finally replied, opting for diplomacy. "And you? Things seem to be going well." Thomas smiled, but there was something in his eyes that Samantha couldn't decipher. "Appearances can be deceiving," he said enigmatically. "Come on, let's get a drink. There's a lot to talk about." As they made their way to the bar, Samantha felt curious glances in her direction. She wondered how many there recognized her. How many knew her story? How many were judging her presence? With glasses of champagne in hand, Thomas guided Samantha to a quieter corner of the room. "So," he began, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "do you know about the scandal?" Samantha frowned, confused. "What scandal?" Thomas looked around, making sure no one was around to hear. "The Fairchild Empire is not as solid as it seems. There are rumors of financial fraud, questionable contracts, bribes. Amanda's family is at the center of it all." The revelation hit Samantha like a punch in the gut. Amanda, always the golden girl, the darling of society, involved in a scandal? It seemed inconceivable. "How do you know that?" Samantha asked, her mind spinning with the implications. "I work in the financial sector," Thomas explained. "News travels fast in the right circles. This wedding? It's more of a PR move than a celebration of love. The Prescotts are a respectable family. An alliance with them could help clean up the Fairchild's image." Samantha took a sip of champagne, trying to process the information. Part of her wanted to discredit Thomas, to defend Amanda, but another part, the part that had faced years of hardship while watching her former friend rise socially, felt a twinge of bitter satisfaction. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. Thomas shrugged. "I thought you, of all people, deserved to know the truth. After all, you and Amanda were inseparable at school. And then, well, things changed, didn't they?" Before Samantha could answer, a commotion near the entrance to the hall caught her attention. Amanda and Jonathan had arrived, greeted by a wave of applause and congratulations. Amanda looked stunning, her wedding dress shimmering under the hall lights. Her smile was radiant as she greeted the guests, but Samantha, who knew her so well, noticed a subtle tension in her eyes, a stiffness in her smile that seemed out of place in a bride on her wedding day. "See?" Thomas murmured. "Manufactured perfection?" Samantha felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Anger at the apparent hypocrisy, sadness at the lost friendship, and a strange sense of empathy. After all, weren't we all, in a way, prisoners of expectations and circumstances? "I need to talk to her," Samantha declared suddenly, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Thomas looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Are you sure? It might not be a good idea to stir up this hornet's nest." But Samantha had already made up her mind. Years of doubts, resentments, and unanswered questions were driving her. This could be her only moment, her only chance to get answers and, perhaps, some kind of closure. With determined steps, She began to move towards Amanda, who was still surrounded by a group of excited guests. Every step seemed to echo in her ears, amplified by anxiety and anticipation. When she was only a few meters away, Amanda finally saw her. Recognition was instantaneous, just as it had been in the church. Amanda's smile faltered for a moment, her eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and fear. "Samantha," Amanda said, her voice just a whisper. "You came." The group around Amanda dispersed discreetly, sensing the tension in the air. For a moment, the two women stood there, face to face, years of unspoken history hanging between them. "Congratulations on the wedding," Samantha finally said, her voice firmer than she felt. Amanda nodded, her eyes never leaving Samantha's. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd show up." "Me neither," Samantha admitted. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. There was so much to be said, so many questions to be asked, but where to start? It was Amanda who finally broke the silence. "Samantha, there's so much I need to tell you. So many things you need to know." But before she could continue, Jonathan appeared at her side, putting a possessive arm around her waist. "Darling, your parents are looking for you." "Oh, hello," he said, noticing Samantha with a raised eyebrow. "And you're?" "An old friend," Amanda answered quickly, a touch of nervousness in her voice. "From school." Jonathan smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "How lovely. Well, we don't want to keep the guests waiting, do we, dear?" Amanda gave Samantha an apologetic look. "Can we talk later? Maybe during the dance?" Samantha nodded, feeling suddenly small and insignificant. "Sure," she murmured, watching as Amanda was led away by Jonathan, disappearing into the crowd of guests. Alone again, Samantha found herself in the middle of the hall, feeling more out of place than ever. Thomas's revelations echoed in her mind, mingling with Amanda's strange reaction and Jonathan's abrupt interruption. There was more going on here than met the eye, and Samantha was determined to find out the truth. As the party continued around her, she headed back to the bar, needing another drink to calm her nerves. The night was still young, and Samantha had a feeling that more surprises were to come. With a deep sigh, she prepared herself for whatever fate had in store for her on this night of reunions and revelations. The ballroom pulsed with music and lively conversation, but to Samantha, it all seemed distant and surreal. With a new glass of champagne in hand, she moved to a quieter corner, near one of the large windows that overlooked the hotel's illuminated gardens. Her thoughts were in turmoil. Thomas's revelations about the supposed scandal involving the Fairchild family, Amanda's strange reaction to seeing her, Jonathan's abrupt interruption. Each piece of the puzzle didn't seem to fit together, forming a distorted and confused picture. "You seem lost in thought," a soft voice snapped her out of her reverie. Samantha turned to find an elegant middle-aged woman standing next to her. There was something familiar about her face, although Samantha couldn't identify exactly what. "I'm Elizabeth, Amanda's mother." The woman introduced herself, extending a delicate hand. "And you must be Samantha. Amanda has told me a lot about you over the years." Samantha felt her heart race. Amanda's mother? The same woman who, according to Thomas, was at the center of the financial scandal? "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Fairchild," Samantha replied, trying to keep her composure. "Amanda, did you talk about me?" Elizabeth smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that didn't go unnoticed by Samantha. "Oh yes, you were inseparable at school, weren't you?" Amanda always regretted losing touch. Something in Elizabeth's voice, a note of sincerity mixed with regret, made Samantha drop her guard. "I'm sorry too," she admitted softly. "A lot has changed since then." Elizabeth nodded, her gaze roaming over the festive crowd. "Things aren't always what they seem, you know, especially in circles like this." She made a sweeping gesture with her hand, indicating the richly dressed guests. Bright smiles often hide heavy hearts. Samantha felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in Elizabeth's words, a hint that there was more behind the Fairchild family's glamorous facade. "Mrs. Fairchild," Samantha began hesitantly, "I've heard rumors about your family, about problems." Elizabeth interrupted her with a gentle gesture. "My dear, in our world, Rumors are as common as champagne at parties like this. But the truth? The truth is much more complex and often much more painful. Before Samantha could press for more details, the music changed to a soft waltz. Elizabeth looked at the dance floor, where Amanda and Jonathan had started dancing, surrounded by other couples. "Look at them," Elizabeth murmured, more to herself than to Samantha. So young, so full of hope. If only… She didn't finish the sentence, but Samantha felt the weight of what was left unsaid. There was a story there, buried under layers of secrets and appearances. "Mrs. Fairchild," Samantha tried again. "What's really going on? Why did Amanda look so upset when she saw me?" Elizabeth turned her gaze to Samantha, studying her intensely. "You really care about her, don't you? After all these years, after everything that's happened?" Samantha hesitated for a moment, but then nodded firmly. "Yes, I do. Despite everything." A deep sigh escaped Elizabeth's lips. "Then maybe you're exactly who Amanda needs right now. Samantha, things are right in our family. This marriage, it's not what it seems." Before Elizabeth could elaborate, Jonathan appeared beside them, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "Elizabeth, dear mother-in-law, I hope you're not boring our guest with old stories." Elizabeth straightened up, her posture instantly changing to one of aristocratic dignity. "Just reminiscing about old times, Jonathan. Nothing to worry about." Jonathan cast a penetrating glance at Samantha. "And you, miss?" "Samantha," she replied, feeling suddenly uncomfortable under his scrutinizing gaze. "Yes, Samantha," he repeated, as if savoring the name. "I hope you're enjoying the party. It's so generous of you to come, considering the circumstances." There was something about the way he said circumstances that made Samantha feel exposed, as if he knew exactly who she was and where she came from. "Jonathan," Amanda's voice sounded behind him, a hint of warning in her tone. "Don't be rude." Amanda joined the group, her eyes alternating nervously between Samantha and her mother. "Is everything all right here?" "Perfectly fine, dear," Jonathan replied, his soft tone contradicting the tension in her shoulders. "Your mother was just socializing." Elizabeth cast a meaningful glance at Samantha before walking away with Jonathan, leaving her alone with Amanda. For a moment, the two women were silent, the weight of unspoken years hanging between them. It was Amanda who finally broke the silence. "Samantha, I'm so sorry. For everything." The sincerity in her voice took Samantha by surprise. "Amanda, what's going on? Your mother? She seemed so…" Amanda looked around nervously before taking Samantha's hand. "Not here. Meet me in the garden in 10 minutes. There's something you need to know." With that, Amanda walked away, leaving Samantha dazed and confused. What could be so important that Amanda would risk walking away from her own wedding party to tell her? The next 10 minutes seemed to drag by. Samantha circled the room, avoiding prolonged conversations, her eyes constantly returning to the large clock on the wall. Finally, when the moment arrived, she made her way discreetly to the gardens. The cool evening air was a relief from the heat of the crowded hall. Samantha followed a path lit by lanterns, the sound of the party diminishing with every step. In a small gazebo, partially hidden by flowering bushes, she found Amanda. The bride had her back to her shoulders tense under her white dress. "Amanda?" Samantha called softly. Amanda turned around, and Samantha was shocked to see tears in her eyes. "Oh, Samantha," she sobbed, "I've ruined everything. Everything is falling apart and I don't know what to do." Samantha approached, hesitantly. Part of her wanted to comfort her former friend, while another part remained cautious, remembering the years of silence and the recent revelations. "Start from the beginning," Samantha said gently. "What's going on?" Amanda took a deep breath, drying her tears with the back of her hand. "It's my father," she began, her voice trembling. He's not dead like everyone thinks. He fled years ago, taking millions with him. The scandal, the rumors, it's all true. And now…" She was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. They both turned to see Jonathan emerging from the shadows, his face a mask of restrained fury. "So this is how you honor your vows, dear," he hissed. "By confiding our secrets to A." Stranger? The air around them seemed charged with electricity. Samantha felt she was at the epicenter of something much bigger and more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. And now, caught between Amanda and Jonathan, she realized that her decisions in the next few moments could change the course of many lives, including her own. The air in the gazebo seemed to have been sucked out, leaving Samantha, Amanda, and Jonathan in a vacuum of palpable tension. The distant sound of the party seemed like an echo from another world. While there, in that small space, time seemed to have frozen. Jonathan stepped forward, his eyes alternating between Amanda and Samantha with a mixture of anger and cold calculation. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" he hissed, directing his fury mainly at Amanda. "Our whole future, everything we've worked for, and you're about to throw it all away because of what? Guilt? Nostalgia?" Amanda, who moments before had looked broken and vulnerable, stood up, facing Jonathan. "No more lies, Jonathan. No more games. Samantha deserves to know the truth. Everyone does." Samantha, feeling like an intruder in a family drama, but at the same time deeply involved, finally found her voice. "What truth? Amanda, what's really going on here?" It was at that moment that a new voice joined the conversation, surprising everyone. "The truth, my dear, is that our family has been living an elaborate lie for years." Elizabeth Fairchild emerged from the shadows of the garden, her face a mask of determination and sadness. "And it's time to put an end to it." Jonathan took a step back, clearly not expecting Elizabeth's arrival. "Mother-in-law, I don't think this is the time or the place to..." Silence. Elizabeth cut him off with an authority that took everyone by surprise. "You no longer have the right to dictate what can and can't be said, Jonathan. Not after what you've done." Samantha looked from Elizabeth to Amanda, and then to Jonathan, sensing that she was about to witness something monumental. "Can someone please tell me what's going on?" Amanda, with tears in her eyes, but with a new determination in her voice, began. "Samantha, do you remember when we were teenagers and my father supposedly died in a boating accident?" Samantha nodded, the memory of those dark days still vivid in her mind. She remembered how devastated Amanda had been, how the whole school seemed to be mourning dear Mr. Fairchild. "He didn't die," Amanda continued. "He ran away, with millions of dollars from investors, including pension funds and innocent people's life savings." Samantha felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "But why? How?" Elizabeth stepped forward, her gaze distant, lost in painful memories. "Richard, my husband, has always been a gambler, not just in the casino, but in life. He made bigger and bigger bets on the markets, using money that wasn't his. When everything started to fall apart, he plotted his own death and disappeared, leaving us to deal with the consequences. That's when we met Jonathan," Amanda continued, casting a contemptuous glance at the man who, until moments ago, was her husband. "He presented himself as our salvation, a brilliant young lawyer who could help us navigate the legal and financial chaos my father left behind." Jonathan, realizing that he was losing control of the situation, tried to intervene. "Everything I did was to protect you, to keep the family's reputation intact." "No," Amanda shouted, years of pent-up anger finally coming to the surface. "You manipulated us. You used our despair and our shame for your own gain. This marriage? It's just a front to legitimize your position in the company, to have full access to the family's resources." Samantha, trying to process everything she was hearing, turned to Elizabeth. "But why now? Why reveal all this after so many years?" Elizabeth sighed deeply. "Because Richard contacted me last week. He's dying, Samantha, and he wants to make amends before it's too late." The revelation hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Amanda sobbed, the reality of her father's situation finally hitting her. Jonathan, on the other hand, seemed to be calculating his options, his eyes moving quickly between the three women. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice a mixture of plea and threat. "Think of the scandal, the ruin it will bring not only to us, but to everyone involved with the Fairchild Company." It was at that moment that Samantha, who until then had felt like a mere spectator in this family drama, found her voice and her purpose. "No, Jonathan," she said, her voice firm and clear. The real scandal would be to continue with this farce. Think of all the people who have been cheated, who have lost their savings. They deserve to know the truth. They deserve a chance to get back what's theirs. Amanda looked at Samantha with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. She's right, Mom. We can't live with this weight any longer. It's time to do the right thing. Elizabeth nodded slowly, years of guilt and secrets weighing on her shoulders. You're right, dear. It's time to face the consequences of our actions and your father's actions. Jonathan, seeing that he was losing control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. You can't do this. I have contracts, agreements. I can ruin you all. It was then that a new voice joined the conversation, causing everyone to turn around in shock. No, you can't, Jonathan. Thomas emerged from the shadows, holding a small recording device. I've heard everything, and I have proof of your manipulations, your threats. It's over. Samantha looked at Thomas with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. He had followed his instincts, suspecting that something bigger was going on, and now he had the proof he needed to expose the whole truth. Jonathan, realizing he was cornered, dropped his mask of arrogance, revealing the frightened and desperate man underneath. You don't understand, he muttered. I just wanted… Enough, Elizabeth interrupted him, her voice laden with years of regret and newfound determination. It's time we did the right thing, for ourselves, for all the people who have been affected by our lies, and for the memory of the man Richard used to be before greed consumed him. Amanda, with tears in her eyes but a new gleam of determination, turned to Samantha. I'm sorry for everything, Sam, for pushing me away, for not trusting you before. You were always the most honest person I knew, and now I see that that's exactly why I walked away. I was ashamed, afraid that you would see through the lies. Samantha, feeling the weight of this historic moment, hugged her old friend. It's okay, Amanda. The important thing is that you're doing the right thing now. As the small group in the gazebo prepared to return to the party and face the consequences of their revelations, Samantha couldn't help but reflect on the strange journey that had brought her there. From a homeless person invited by pity to a key player in a moment of redemption and truth, she found herself at the center of a storm that would change many lives. The sound of the party continued in the distance, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the gardens. But Samantha knew that soon, very soon, that sound of celebration would turn into something very different, and she would be there, by Amanda's side, facing whatever came next. The ballroom, once vibrant with music and laughter, was now plunged into a stunned silence. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on the small group that had just entered. Amanda, still in her wedding dress, but with eyes red from crying. Elizabeth, with a rigid posture of determination. Samantha, looking at once out of place and perfectly in place. And Thomas, tightly gripping the recording device that would change everything. Jonathan had disappeared the moment they entered the hall, probably attempting a desperate escape before the revelations came to light. But that didn't matter now. The truth was about to be revealed, and nothing could stop it. Elizabeth was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with each word. Dear friends and family, I beg your pardon for interrupting this celebration, but there is something you need to know, something that should have been said a long time ago. A murmur went through the crowd as Elizabeth began to tell the full story. The false death of Richard Fairchild, the millions embezzled, years of lies and cover-ups. As she spoke, Samantha watched the guests' reactions. Shock, disbelief, anger. All the emotions washed over the faces of LA's elite like waves on a turbulent ocean. Amanda, standing next to her mother, occasionally added details to the narrative, her voice strained but determined. She talked about the weight of carrying this secret for years, about how it had poisoned every aspect of her life, including her relationship with Jonathan. When it was Thomas's turn to play the recording, revealing Jonathan's threats and manipulations, the hall erupted into a chaos of excited voices. Some screamed for justice, others wept as they realized that their life savings might be lost, and a few desperately tried to deny the reality that was unfolding before them. In the midst of all the turmoil, Samantha stood like a silent anchor. Her gaze met Amanda's, and in that moment, an understanding passed between them. Despite the years of separation, Despite the lies and secrets, the bond they had shared in their youth was still there, perhaps stronger than ever. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly man, who had been sitting quietly in a corner of the room, slowly stood up. His face, marked by time and remorse, was unmistakable to those who knew him. "Richard," Elizabeth whispered, her voice barely audible in the tumult of the hall. Richard Fairchild, the man everyone believed had been dead for years, walked slowly to the center of the hall. Silence fell over the crowd like a heavy cloak. I have come to take responsibility for my actions," he said, his voice hoarse and tired. "I can't undo the harm I've caused, but I can face the consequences now." Amanda ran into her father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Elizabeth, after a moment's hesitation, joined in the embrace. It was a family reunion scene that no one could have predicted earlier that evening. As the Fairchild family gathered, Samantha felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Thomas. "You made this happen, you know," he said softly. "Your presence here was the catalyst for all this truth to come out." Samantha shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. I just wanted to understand. I wanted to know why things happened the way they did. Sometimes that's all you need to change the world," Thomas replied with a gentle smile. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. The police were called, statements were made, and the guests slowly dispersed, many still in a state of shock. Amanda, after talking briefly to her parents, approached Samantha. "Sam," she began, her voice laced with emotion, "I don't even know where to begin to thank you or to apologize." Samantha hugged her old friend tightly. "No need to thank me, Amanda. And as for the apology, maybe we can start again? No secrets this time." Amanda nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'd like that very much." As the evening drew to a close, Samantha found herself in the garden again, this time alone, contemplating the surreal events of the last few hours. The invitation to this wedding, which she had almost ignored, turned out to be the turning point not only for the Fairchild family, but for herself. "I thought I might find you here," Elizabeth's voice sounded behind her. The older woman looked exhausted, but there was a new light in her eyes, the light of truth finally revealed. "Mrs. Fairchild," Samantha began, but Elizabeth gently interrupted her. "Elizabeth, please. I think that after tonight, formalities are unnecessary between us." Samantha nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Elizabeth, how are you?" Elizabeth sighed deeply, looking up at the stars. "Honestly, I'm exhausted, relieved, scared, all at the same time, but most of all, I'm grateful. Grateful that you came tonight, Samantha. Your presence gave us the courage we needed to finally face the truth." Samantha felt a lump in her throat. "I didn't do anything. You did everything," Elizabeth interrupted her gently. "Sometimes, all we need is an outsider to show us how far we've strayed from the path." They sat in silence for a moment, gazing out at the moonlit garden. "What happens now?" Samantha finally asked. Elizabeth shrugged, a surprisingly casual gesture for a woman usually so composed. "Honestly, I don't know. There will be legal consequences, of course. Richard will have to answer for his crimes. We'll all have to deal with the repercussions of years of lies. But," she paused, a small smile forming on her lips, "for the first time in years, I feel like we are on the right track." Samantha nodded, understanding the feeling perfectly. She too felt on a new path, although she had no idea where it would take her. "What about you, Samantha?" Elizabeth asked softly. "What does the future hold for you?" Samantha looked up at the starry sky, pondering the question. Just a few hours ago, her future had seemed so limited, so hopeless. Now, suddenly, it seemed full of possibilities. "I don't know," she admitted, "but for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to finding out." Elizabeth smiled, placing a gentle hand on Samantha's shoulder. "Well, whatever it is, know that you'll always have a place with us. Not just as Amanda's friend, but as part of the family." The words touched Samantha deeply. Family. It was something she hadn't had for so long. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samantha found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her here. From pity guest to catalyst for a great revelation, she had rediscovered not only her old friendship with Amanda, but also her own strength and worth. The future was still uncertain. There would be challenges ahead, both for the Fairchild family and for herself. But for the first time in years, Samantha was facing this future not with fear or resignation, but with hope and determination. As she walked back to the hotel, ready to face the new day and all that it would bring, Samantha smiled to herself. Life, she realized, was like a marriage, full of promises, challenges, and sometimes surprising revelations. And she, Samantha, was ready for her new beginning.